Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Let's start with a Shabad that all of us, I think a lot of us might know, so we can say it together. Hum avguna pare, ek gun nahi, amrit chad bikhe bikakai, maya moh parampe kule, sotudara syo preet lagaye, ek uttam pant samyo kur sangat, Jam tras mitai, ek ardas aat kirat ki, Guru Ramdas rakho sharanai. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Interesting Sikh history fact: Pat Kirat, who wrote that Shabad, actually attained Shahidi fighting for Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji in his 4th battle. So he fought on the battlefield with his sarangi on his back, actually, which is a super cool story. Today we're going to be telling the stories of 4 Sikhs, but there are 3 Sakis. And we're going to be talking about people whose experience was, let me set my timer so I get distracted. So people who had to face a lot of difficulties in walking on the path of Sikhi. And those may have been familial difficulties, political difficulties, and sometimes even Panthik difficulties, as in the Sikh community didn't support them. And so we're going to look at 3 lesser known but inspiring people that I think maybe we can bring some of those qualities to bear to the rest of the workshops this weekend, and try to bring some of that love and passion for Sikhi into our own hearts. At the time of Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji, there was a young woman whose father was a Muslim judge. Anybody know what a Muslim judge is called? Qazi, yeah. And the reason why I had sent the girls away, the young girls who had come here earlier, is because her father was sexually assaulting her. The history is pretty clear on it, but it doesn't say it in direct terms. It uses all the euphemisms that are common in Punjabi culture. But she was being sexually abused by her father from a young age. She was also being sent to learn from different Muslim teachers so that she could be a good Muslim by her father. And some of her teachers were Sufis, who were students themselves of Sai Mian Mir, because this is the time of Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji. And Sai Mian Mir was still alive then. For those of you who don't know, Sai Mian Mir was a good friend of Guru Arjan Sahib Ji and Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji. And according to most Sikh sources, he laid the foundation stone for Harmandir Sahib. Those Sufis, those dervishes, darvish, they would sing shabads from Guru Granth Sahib Ji sometimes during the day while they were teaching. And those shabads struck something inside of her. And not having ever learned about Sikhi, not ever having heard anything about Sikhs or who they are, because she, as you can imagine, grew up in a very sheltered and closed environment, she fell in love with Bani. And she started to ask the Darvish, whose Bani is this? And they told her about Guru Arjan Sahib Ji and the earlier Gurus, and how now on the Takat of Guru Nanak was Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji. A little while later, and it's not clear in the history how long we're talking about, she was a young woman at this time, probably in her mid to late teens. There was an outbreak of the plague in Lahore. And Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji, and I really like this part of the story because we have sort of ideas of the Gurus in our mind which aren't always accurate. Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji, we kind of have this vision of him as being a warrior, right? But he fought 4 battles early on in his Gurgadi, in his Guruship, and he was Guru for the longest of any Guru besides Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. So the majority of his life was not as a warrior fighting. And when this plague broke out, Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji and Sangat came from Amritsar to take care of the people of Lahore. Just the same way that Guru Sahib's great-grandson, Guru Harkrishan Sahib Ji, would take care of the people of Delhi when smallpox came. And she managed to see from where her house was that Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji was actually caring for the people who had plague with his own hands. without concern for the risk to his own life. And to see a warrior, dressed as a warrior, taking care of people like that, it was such a strange sight for her. She had never witnessed anything like that. So her family was a wealthy one. She had servants. And she asked one of her close servants to get a letter to Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji. And in the letter she explained what was happening to her in her father's house. And she asked for Guruji to save her. So Guruji quickly sent a letter back, and this letter is very important for the ideas we're talking about this weekend. Guruji said, doesn't matter what the circumstances, I will be there, and I will take you to Amritsar, and I will save you. But you have to leave your house on your own. You have to take that first step of freeing yourself, and then I will carry you the rest of the way. And so that night, she escaped from the top window of her home. And Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji and 5 Sikhs were waiting, and they took her back to Amritsar. When we talk about the path of a Bhagat, it's a path that is so thin. You know, Sheikh Farid Ji uses the example of Pul Salat. Does anyone know what the Pul Salat is? In Islamic eschatology, the idea is that when the soul dies, it has to cross over a bridge called Salat, and that bridge is as narrow as a hair. And if you've done bad things, you don't fall down, and below is hell. And if you're good, you get to go to the other side, which is heaven. And then part of the deal with heaven is you get to look down and laugh at the people in hell. Okay? So, yeah, that sounds like fun. And Sheikh Farid Ji uses that example of what the path of someone in love with Vaheguru should be. So a path like that, we can ask ourselves, how would we ever be able to walk a path so narrow? And the fact is that we can't. There's no way we could. But without Guru Sahib's Kirpa, it's an impossibility. But at the same time, that Kirpa is essential. You have to be able to take that first step yourself. Guru can't make you do that part. You have to come to the Guru's path, like Guru Nanak Sahib Ji says, right? So it's a step that has to be fearless. So we can only imagine the psychological and physical damage that had been done to this young woman her whole life, and how terrifying it must have been, the thought of leaving her father's house. But she had to take that courageous step, and only when she had taken that could she then receive the Guru's Kirpa. So Guru's Kirpa was always there, but you have to be willing to step forward to receive it, right? When she was taken back to Amritsar, the Sangat took care of her and nursed her back to health. And it's very interesting if you look at it like from anybody here in like psychology or social work or any of that type of field. Okay. So if you're in those fields, you know, one big aspect of those fields is trauma work. People who have been traumatized and how to help them recover. And it's really beautiful to see in the Sakhi how the Sangat helps this young woman recover slowly over time. And Guruji asked the Sangat to build her a small home at a small pond that's close to Amritsar side. Not Amritsar the city, I mean Amritsar the Sarovar, you know where her mother side is. And there over time she slowly recovers, and as she's recovering she learns more and more about Sikhi, and she becomes just fully invested in being a Sikh. And she becomes famous in the community for doing seva all day and doing bhakti all the time. And she's given a title that's very unique in Sikh history. So I think I have time to go on a tangent. So in Sikh history, up from Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's time to the 1800s, there were only 4 titles that were ever given to Sikhs. Pai, Bibi, Mata, Baba. So brother, sister, mother, father. And those were the highest titles you could get. And Pai was not some little title. the Panch Pyare were called Pai, right? Pai Gurdas Ji, who wrote the first copy of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, was a Pai. And of course, one of the greatest Sikhs of all time, Pai Lerna Ji, who became Guru Angad Sahib Ji, was a Pai. And Baba, there's three types of Babas. There's someone who gets older, who's a prominent Sikh, so that Baba Buddha Ji was called Pai Buddha from Guru Nanak's time to Guru Ramdas Ji's time. But by the time Guru Arjan and Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji came along, he was known as Baba Buddha Ji. Or Baba Deep Singh used to be Pai Deepa, and when he fought for Banda Singh Bahadur, he was Pai Deep Singh, and then he became Baba Deep Singh. Similarly, for women, Bibi was a very high title. So you have Bibi Daler Kaur, you have Bibi Nanaki. It's the highest, one of the highest titles that a Sikh could, a female Sikh could receive, except for, I forgot to mention the other types of Baba. The other types are the later Gurus, before they became Guru, were called Baba. So like Baba Gobind Rai, or Baba Harai, Baba Harkishan, or the Sahibjadas, like the Dar Sahibjade, or Baba Tal. I think that's it. Oh, and the third category is a really amazing Sikh who's done something really exemplary. So a good example of that would be Baba Banda Singh Bahadur. On the female side, the equivalent is Mata. And we see that a lot of women associated with the Gurus are given the title of Mata, like the Guru's wives. But also Sikh women who've done really exemplary acts are given Mata. So a really famous one that a lot of us know is Mata Pak or Mai Pago. So she was quite young when she was given that title. She wasn't an old lady, but she was given that title because her act was so great. And so this young woman, who, a name I haven't told you yet, her title, she was given the title of Mata by the Sangha. And in my looking at Sikh history and how it's become so male dominated, it's quite sad that one of only 2 or 3 women in the Guru period who were given that title, who weren't like the wives or mothers of the Guru, that very little is known about her, and her story isn't told. It's a very powerful story that has I think a lot of us could really learn a lot from. This young woman's name was Kola, Mata Kolandi. And Kola means a lotus flower. Now, lotus is very important in all the Indic religions. Buddhism and Hinduism, they all use the lotus as a symbol. But Sikhi, for Sikhs, the metaphor of a lotus is tied really closely with the idea of bhakti. And it's because the mud that a lotus roots are growing in represent the world. And as we'll see in the talk that me and Puneet Singh do tomorrow, each of the historic Bhagats too they all had jobs. Bhagat Kabir Ji had a job, Bhagat Namdev had a job, Bhagat Ravidas had a job. They never gave up their sort of everyday lives, actually. And that muck and mud, that's sort of how to deal with everyday life in the world. But at the same time, the flower that stems from that, the internal flower, the lotus, is pure and beautiful. And it's not pure and beautiful because it's separate from the mud, it's pure and beautiful because it's connected to it. That's what Sikhi is about. So it's not that you are perfect in spite of the world, you're perfect because you are in the world and you're engaged with it and you're socially involved in it. And that represents Mata Kolandi in her life in Amritsar after she came there. It's hinted that due to the abuse she suffered, she became very ill. And we don't know why or what the disease was that led to her death at a very young age. But she quickly became very ill. And Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji came to her when she had 24 hours left, and the historical sources are very concerned, exactly 24 hours. I don't know how accurate that is. But in the Sikh history that I've read, I can see only 3 other Sikhs, besides Sikhs that died in battle. Guru Gobind Singh Ji held them in their arms, with Jali Mukti and stuff. But Bhai Mardana, Baba Buddha Ji, and Mata Kola are 3 Sikhs where the Guru sat with them through their time up until their last breath. And Guru Sahib Ji stayed with her for those full 24 hours and talked her through the process of dying in this really beautiful way. and taught her to connect to Akal Murad, that's a phrase that's used, and to accept the true nature of her soul. And she died with Guru Sahib right next to her, literally saying Vaheguru. And after she died, Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji did something very unique and special. There are, Amritsar is a special city. Anandpur Sahib and Amritsar, I would say, out of the 10 cities that the Gurus made, were like very unique. Anandpur Sahib has 5 kille, and they all have sort of symbolic meanings to them. And Amritsar has 5 sarovars. And they're all concepts of Sikhi, Santok, Amrit, Vivek, Ram. And then there's Kausar. And Kausar is named after a Sikh. It's the only one that's named after an individual. And so the amount of respect that Guru Sahib gave to Mata Kola is really incredible. He built a sarovar there, and even if you go to Amritsar Sahib today, there's something unique about that space because it's right next to Harmandir Sahib, but it's very quiet and peaceful. And that sort of quiet and peaceful energy that Mata Kola brought to that space is still there today. What we see in her life is someone who comes from a very traumatic background, and when we say when a family is unsupportive of your Sikhi, like that's extreme. I had left out a detail later because I wanted to touch on it now, but when her father heard her, I don't know if this part of the story is true, it seems almost too extreme, but then someone who's been sexually abusing their daughter for years, you wouldn't really put anything past them. But when he found out that she was reciting the Shabad of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, he went to other qazis and said, what should I do with my daughter? She's refusing to stop singing Kafir's poetry. And they're like, you have to make an example of her, you have to cut off her head. And so he was willing to cut off his daughter's head because she was falling in love with Sikhi. And so for her to, first of all, fall in love with Sikhi and then take that brave step, it shows a real commitment to the path of Sikhi, but most importantly in that narrative is that Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji was there to catch her. So the path of bhakti is not a path that we can tread by ourselves, it's only with the Guru's hand at our side, or carrying us. Okay, I'm doing good, I'm 5 minutes out of schedule, Nadeep Singh. Let's go on to the next Sakhi.
Question.
Hanji.
Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji bestowed the title of Mata only, or was Khala her name of the very beginning?
It's unclear. It doesn't seem like a very Muslim name. It seems like that is probably her name after she took Jarnpol, but the history is missing. The other problem is that most figures who are prominent in Sikh history, we have like no real information about them. Another woman who is given the title of Mata is Mai Kabli, who was one of Guru Amar Das Ji's Manjidas, and was in charge of preaching Sikhi in a Muslim area in Afghanistan. But we don't know her real name even. We just know that she's from Kabul. Or Guru Hadai Sahib Ji's daughter, adopted daughter at that, which is also another really unique thing, Bibi Sarupur, was raised as a scholar by Guru Hadai Sahib Ji. But we have no information about the books she might have written or any history about them. So unfortunately, Sikh men have written Sikh history, so Sikh women's stories aren't always told. Any other questions? We can stop between. Does anybody have any questions about Mata Kola? Should we move on? So, Sikh history is sometimes messy. And I think I was having a nice talk with Puneet Virji yesterday, that's good because life is messy as well. And we sometimes have an idea like everyone was a warrior and everyone was fighting the Mughals. But that's not the case. For example, in the 1700s, you had people like Bhai Tara Singh. Bhai Tara Singh wasn't a warrior, he was just some regular dude who was a farmer and would do seva, not regular, but he was just, he wasn't, if we were to see him, we would just think he was just a regular farmer. But he was putting his life on the line to give langar to the Gaurs and Singhs in the jungles who were fighting the battles. So not everyone was a warrior. And in fact, to the other extreme, some people were even working for the government. And that seems like really weird. Like, how do you work for a government that's killing Sikhs? And a part of us can judge that, but then in our own families, I think a lot of us might have people who were part of the Indian state in some way, either in the civil service or in the army or in the police or something, post-84. And so we can see that a lot of us make compromises in our lives in different ways. And maybe we shouldn't be so quick to judge either. So we're going to be talking about a father and son named Sabeg Singh and Shabazz Singh. Now Sabeg Singh was a quite wealthy Sikh, and he happened to also be very knowledgeable in Persian. The Mughal government's language of the court language was Persian, just like in Europe. All the courts of Europe spoke mainly French. That was the court language. And from Iran all the way to South Asia, the court language, including Afghanistan and other areas, the court language was primarily Persian. And that was true even in Maharajah Ranjit Singh's kingdom as well. Because he was an expert in Persian, and he may have had some legal training, or could the title of Vakil be a generic title?
No. He was a lawyer.
He was a lawyer, yeah. So I don't know what being a lawyer in that context means, but I guess you must know Mughal law well, right? So he was a Vakil. At that time, the Khalsa Panth was, excuse my language, kicking ass. We were in the jungles. We had no resources, no money, no proper food, but we were managing to disrupt the empire systems to their core. We were stopping all their tax revenue and distributing it to the poor. We were attacking them in the middle of the night. We were saving people who were being enslaved. And even though we were at our lowest point in terms of material wealth, literally the Panth was never lower than that stage, people were converting to Sikhi at a level that has rarely been seen either. And I guess that's maybe my response to the whole debate going on right now with Sikh values and American values, is that Sikhi flourishes when we're under attack. We don't wither, that's when we do our best. So, you know, they weren't doing PR campaigns, is my point. So the Sikhs were going out there and they were not letting up day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. To the point where the Mughals were like, we've tried to wipe these guys out so many times, there's got to be a better idea. And the governor of Punjab, Zakaria Khan, came up with the idea. They actually say he asked the main Mughal emperor in Delhi, he said, what should we do about these guys? And they're like, buy them off. Everyone else gets bought off eventually. So they decided to offer the Sikhs a Nawabi. And a Nawabi is a lordship. And a lordship means that you have rule over a certain number of villages or land. And that land revenue was 100,000 rupees in that day. We couldn't figure out what that is in today's money, but like, I imagine it's got to be in the tens of millions of dollars or something. Like, if we're talking about inflation and stuff, it's a huge amount of money. They needed somebody to go to the Khalsa to offer the Nawabi though. And they're like, if any of us go, they'll just kill us. So they said to Sabeg Singh, they said, you're Sikh, you work for us, you know our rules, go take this Nawabi to the Khalsa and offer them this Nawabi. So at the Sarbat Khalsa in 1733, he came there and he offered the Nawabi to the Khalsa Panth. Before he could enter into the Akal Takht area, they stopped him and they said, you're not allowed to come here. And they said, because you work for the Mughal government, you are not a Khalsa anymore. And non-Khalsa cannot come into the Akal Takht space. And they said, you are Tankaya and you have to take Amrit again in order to enter the space. So they did an Amrit Sajjad and he had to pay a tanka, and he was then allowed to address the Khalsa. So this is a guy who is working for a government that hates him, and a Panth that doesn't trust him as well. He offers a Nawabi, and that's a whole other story, we're not going to get into it, but in the end, Nawab Kapoor Singh is given the title. And the Sikhs accepted with a blatant plan right from the beginning that we're just going to take the money and then start fighting them without money. So they don't even wait, they literally right away start attacking them again. And the Mughals are like, that was a terrible idea. And it was the fact that that idea turned out so terrible and the money that was lost was so terrible that made the anger of Zakriya Khan so much more, which led to the torture and killing of Paitaru Singh. And when Paitaru Singh was dying, do you guys remember the sort of curse or whatever that was given to Zakriya Khan? Who remembers? Thurman Singh, can you say it out loud?
Puneet Singh.
Puneet Singh?
I'm doing it.
Yeah, but why did he have to slap himself in the head with chappal? No, he couldn't pass his urine. He couldn't urinate. This is a weird story, I'm not going to deny it, but this is what the oldest sources tell us this, that the guy couldn't urinate, the governor started to not be able to urinate, and the only way that he could take a leak was if he took Paitaru Singh's chappal and slapped himself in the head. And he lived for 17 days in this miserable state of smacking himself in the head all day until finally his body gave out. When he died, his son Yahya Khan became the governor. And Yahya Khan was pretty pissed about how his dad had died. Because
I didn't joke that.
I didn't actually mean that.
Yeah, I don't think
Why are they laughing? So Yahya Khan turned his wrath or his anger onto Sabeg Singh. And they said, we gotta get rid of this guy. They're like, he's the one who brought them. Oh, by the way, Sabeg Singh was the one, when the governor stopped being able to urinate, he actually sent an ambassador to the Khalsa, and he asked the Khalsa, Nawab Kapoor Singh was a leader of the Panth at that time. They said, did this have something to do with how we killed David Singh? And they're like, yeah, and if you want to get out of it, you got to smack yourself in the head with this chappal. And so that was a message from the Khalsa. And so it was Sabeg Singh who passed the message between them. So he's kind of like shoot the messenger idea. So they say to Sabeg Singh, Sabeg Singh, you have to convert to Islam or we are going to kill you. At the same time, Sabeg Singh's son is this really handsome 18-year-old young man named Shahbaz Singh. And they go to Shahbaz Singh and they say, you have to convert to Islam or we're going to kill you. And then they try to play these method games with the two of them. So after a few days of kind of torturing them and harassing them, they say to Sabeg Singh, your son is already converted. You might as well convert too. And Sabeg Singh just starts laughing. He's like, first of all, that's unlikely. And secondly, I don't care even if he did. It doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not going to convert.
Oh my God. Alternative party.
Alternative fact, there you go. Now I'm imagining Donald Trump dressed as a Mughal.
You're being recorded.
I know. That way this won't make it onto the internet. So, at the same time, they told Shahbaz Singh that his father had already been killed. They said, your father's already been killed, and he died gruesomely, and if you might as well save yourself. And they're like, not only, and you'll notice this is like the same enticement they gave to Paitaru Singh. They're like, not only will you convert, we'll give you stuff, we'll let you marry a beautiful young Muslim woman, we'll make you some important person, you're really smart, you know Persian, you know Arabic, all this stuff, right? And he stuck firm. And then they brought the two of them together. And they're like, okay, you're both not dead, you're both here. One last time, will you convert or not? And they didn't. So they put the son onto the wheel first, because a father, to see their child tortured would be heartbreaking for most of us. And so there's two versions. One is that the second wheel has spikes on it, like the paintings we see, and one is that the second wheel just slowly crushes you again and again, and they keep rolling you, so it lasts longer. I don't know which one's worse. But regardless, both of them were shaheed, and their last words were aqal for both of them. How much time do I have? So, whether we can judge Santbir Singh for working for a government that's openly killing Sikhs, I don't know. Like, it seems troubling. I used to use his story as an example of why Sikhs shouldn't work for certain governments or corporations that do things that are anti-Gurmat, because he was made to be a tankhaya if he wanted to join the fund. But at the same time, he gave shaheedi in a way that I think few of us would ever be able to. Like, who are we to judge? So he demonstrated that even in a situation where your community doesn't have necessarily your back, your connection to the Guru still needs to be like very strong. And he never wavered in his lifetime to his commitment to Sikhi, regardless of whether he was working for the Mughals or sending messages back and forth. He was kind of in an impossible situation, to be honest, as well. When he was told to give the offer Nawabi to the Khalsa Panth, they said, if you don't do it, we'll kill you. And at the same time, he understood that this could be to the benefit of the Panth if they were smart about how they used it. So he wanted to help out the Panth in that way. So it's hard to capture their exact ideas, but I think the idea I wanted to capture from the story of Santbir Singh and Shahbaz Singh is that to walk on the path can sometimes be lonely. And that is something that you see a lot in later Sikh stories as well, and it feeds directly into our next and our last Sakhi, which is Professor Gurmat Singh. So we have, we're taught Punjabi at Punjabi schools. Some of us learn it a lot worse than others, right? And we understand that Punjabi is like the language of the Sikhs in a sense, but that wasn't always the case. In Ranjit Singh's kingdom, Persian was the language of the courts, and the scholarly language that people wrote books in was Braj Bhasha. And the two great works of that time period, the Farid Kortika and Suraj Prakash, and I use great not as in good, but great as in monumental and influential, were both not written in Punjabi. And that's not necessarily a slam against Punjabi, because even Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib and Guru Gobind Singh Ji didn't really use Punjabi very much. We're not going to get into a Dasamgan discussion here, obviously, but out of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Bani, Bhagwati Ji Ki Var, which we use for Ardas, is the only major Bani in Punjabi, and then Mittar Pyare Nu is a small Shabad in Punjabi, and that's it. Guru Gobind Singh Ji didn't write anything else in Punjabi, whether you believe all of it or 20% or whatever, you know? But what happened later was that Punjabi was considered not a sophisticated language. And it's ironic because Hindi/Urdu, which is by linguistic standards one language, is a modern language. It was developed in the 17 to 1800s. And Punjabi's pedigree is like much more ancient. All those ancient stories like Hiranja and Sasupanu and what's the other one? Laila Majnu. Those all show up in Punjabi literature over 1,000 years ago. And they were folk tales, not written by one author. And the first authored work in Punjabi, does anyone know who the first person who signed their name to their work in Punjabi is? They're in Guru Granth Sahib Ji. They were Muslim. Okay, there you go. Sheikh Farid, writing in the 1200s, is the first Punjabi author poetry. So Punjabi is an ancient language and a beautifully poetic language that has this rich history, but over time, because of the influence of Delhi and stuff, it was pushed down as not as important. The state of Punjabi as a spoken language had become, and a taught language, was so pathetic that when the Singh Sabha layer started in the 1870s, it wasn't really being taught to anybody. And Professor Gurmat Singh is really the person who we can most thank for the rejuvenation of Punjabi. He wrote the first books in Punjabi. He got the first university courses taught in Punjabi at Oriental College, Lahore. He pushed for that. He wrote the first Punjabi newspaper called Khalsa Akhbar, which was very important for Panthic reform as well. And Professor Gurmat Singh made monumental efforts to bring Punjabi back from, the brink of like being a language that was a spoken language still, but had no sort of scholarly or anything. So it's amazing to think about, but Bhai Veer Singh, when he was 19 years old and wrote Sundari, and yes, he was only 19 when he wrote it, when he wrote that book, that is the first novel in Punjabi history. It's the first non-poetic work of Punjabi history. So the Singh Sabha layer people really emphasized, even though all of them were very well educated and knew Persian and Urdu, they all insisted on writing in Punjabi because that was the language of the people. And that's how they were able to influence the people and transform the Panth. Professor Gurmat Singh, if you think the state of Punjabi was bad, then you'll be really horrified about the state of the Panth. This is a time when women couldn't take Amrit, where low-caste people couldn't take Amrit, and where people who were of a Muslim background could not take Amrit. This is a time when murtiyan were openly displayed in some darbars and on the Prakarma of Harmandir side, and where the state of Maryada was pretty, I don't even know if you could use the word Maryada at that point, right? The main thrust of the reform movement was focused on bringing women and low-caste people back into the Panth and creating a space for them in the community. And the act of giving Amrit to women and to low-caste people was revolutionary at the time. The act of giving prashad to women and low-caste people was considered really shocking. So they started to do these reforms, do these Amrit Sanjars, and people were horrified by them. The Sikh sort of intelligentsia, the Sikh elites were really disgusted by this. We're talking about a group of people, the head Granthi of Darbar Sahib wrote a book called Hum Hindu Hain, as a response to Gan Singh Nabba's Hum Hindu Nahi Hain. This is literally the state of the Panth at the time. And Professor Gurmat Singh gets into a conflict because in every reform movement there's always some people who want to go a little bit further and some people who want to go a little bit slower. And the 1870s to the 1940s are sort of like this sort of race between these two groups, and the one group kind of is like, uh-oh, we're going too far, we're not comfortable with speaking about the British in that way, or we're not comfortable with doing this, and then they'll kind of back off, and there'll be a subgroup, usually made of younger people, who are more revolutionary until the Panth keeps progressing forward. I think that's natural because radical change all at once is not how the Panth works. If we look at Guru Nanak Sahib to Guru Gobind Singh, it's about slow progressive change. But some things are also unexcusable, and that was that one of the main reformers was a guy who claimed to be descended from Guru Nanak Sahib. And I say claimed to be descended because, first of all, it's 400 years later, and secondly, we're only counting descent from the male lineage because of Punjabi patriarchal or South Asian patriarchal ideas of genealogy. So who knows how many female descendants there are out there? It's a ridiculous thing to even argue about. But his name was Khem Singh Biddi. And Khem Singh Biddi, because he was from Guru Nanak's family, insisted that Jor Sahib be done over his head in Diwan Hall, in Guru Granth Sahib Ji's presence. and that he be allowed to sit on a gaddi in the divan, including Harmandir Sahib. And Gurmat Singh and those guys were like, we can't, this is like too much, we can't deal with this. And they spoke against him, and they wrote articles against him, and does anyone know what the response was to that? What happened to Professor Gurmat Singh for speaking against Khem Singh Bedi?
Communicated.
He was kicked out of the Panth for it. Excommunicated from the Khalsa Panth. So they literally got the Jathadars together and they kicked him out of the Panth for telling the guy not to sit on a cushion in Guru's huzuri. Imagine what they say about the milk crates in Agra, right? That's a joke. I know some people are disabled. I'm not trying to be mean.
What did they do?
Milk crates in Sabah. Don't they have them here? They have those of us inside? It's a Canadian thing?
You guys don't have milk crates.
Oh, they don't have milk crates?
We have milk bags, so that's not milk crates. We just
Non-American man.
I know they don't have milk bags here. That's always the thing.
we need that.
Okay, back to the thing. Sorry. You can just edit that whole thing out. Oh. How much time do I have left? Well, I still have time, right? I got 15 minutes. It's good.
It's 46.
That's awesome. So Professor Gurmat Singh,
You can keep that.
I've been so careful. He got me so paranoid that you always go over it at the time. Professor Gurmat Singh Honi, they kept reforming, and him along with Jawair Singh and Gyani Dit Singh, Jawahar Singh, made a dramatic change in the community. And the way they were able to do that, we're taking now, I think I can handle a tangent now, because this will play into the awesome interview I'm looking forward to of Kuldeep Ankobi by Japman Kaur, is that when Sikhs have been really able to have an impact is when we can co-opt the technology of the group people around us for revolutionary purposes. And I'll give 3 examples. When Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji brought Tadi Wala tradition into the Panth, he took a folk style of music that was popular in Punjab and he made it revolutionary. And he taught people how to fight through music. And he inspired them through music. And it was such a amazingly obvious thing, but also so brilliant as well. And it's a very different tradition than Gurmat Sangeet, but it's also a very necessary tradition in the Panth, because whenever the Panth starts going through a period of violence being perpetrated against us, be it in the 1920s post the Namgana Sahib massacre or in the 80s, you'll see that Dadi Wala become very important to the community. They're a natural sort of thing that we hold on to, because the stories of old shaheeds gets mixed with the stories of new shaheeds, and you create sort of a tapestry of Panthic history that really speaks to people. Similarly, in the 1870s and 80s, before the British came, there weren't printing presses in Punjab. It would take forever to write a book, to propagate a book, and that's why knowledge was very exclusive. But Sikhs very quickly gravitated towards the full abilities of printing presses. And Professor Gurmat Singh didn't just make one newspaper, they made like 7 newspapers. These guys were just making newspapers left, right, and center. Gyani Dit Singh wrote 125 little books, those pamphlet type books. Bhavir Singh wrote over 200 articles, I think, or something, little pamphlet size articles, besides all the books. They were just producing tons of content, sort of blog posts or stuff like that, but a lot better written, and they used this technology to really transform the Panth. They took the British printing press and turned it on its head. And in the 1980s, when one guy had the guts to speak the truth to the Indian government, his speeches were spread around the world, in North America and Europe and even around Punjabi villages, cassette tapes were made of Baba Jarnail Singh's speeches, and they were passed on. And I remember when I was little, those cassette tapes coming to our house, and like my dad listened to them, and people like getting the videos. Sometimes there was like a couple of grainy videos, and look like they've been re-recorded like 15 or 16 times, and like the voice would, you know, modulate up and down in weird places and staticky. And so Uncle G, I just found out recently, was one of those people who was making those recordings and spreading them at that time in North America, helping spread that message. And so we used, you know, cassette technology and video technology in this really awesome way, in a way that probably, you know, the Indian government wasn't too happy about. And Baba Jarnail Singh's revolutionary and truth-filled message was able to spread. So that's the beauty of a Panth. Guru Granth Sahib Ji is a static being. We dare not change even one, you know, little grammatical mark. Because Guru Sahib Ji is odd, primal and perfect, right? But a Panth is an ever-growing institution. It's like something that can evolve, you know, holding on to basic, you know, kakars and other basic principles that are in the Riyat Maryada. But in terms of the way we experience Sikhi, the way we teach Sikhi, there's like no end to the possibilities, you know? Just the way that Guru Hargobind Sahib Ji was revolutionary, you know, you see people doing like cool Instagram posts or videos or documentaries, or I don't know if anybody's doing animation. Has anybody done cool animation? Yeah, no. Like, you know, like claymation, or, you know, there'd be so many interesting opportunities, video games, you know, like Baba Deep Singh cutting out people's heads left, right, and center. How far can you throw the head, you know? See? You see how engaging that would be? Kids would play that.
We could make it. Good.
Okay, before we end, to get back to our main theme though, after that tangent. Professor Gurmat Singh had kind of a really, like when he first started, no one was on board with him. He was he had the help of a rich Sikh, so there was that. You know, you need financial backing to get things done, there's no doubt. But his ideas of like, let's bring Punjabi language back, let's teach it in schools, let's teach it in universities. He's a guy who got Khalsa College made. Let's have a college that's, you know, named Khalsa College, and where Sikhs can go, and you're supposed to be Amritari to attend. Like, you know, Khalsa College's first initial ideas are different than what it's become, right? And the grassroots level, bottom-up type of education he was doing through newspapers and pamphlets, and then the top-down by providing educational institutions that could then, you know, take people who were going along that path and then develop them further. All of the leadership, all of the political leadership that came later in the 20s and 30s and freed all of India only developed because those guys built those institutions in the 1870s. I was talking last night, we were talking last night, and I was saying to Ruben Balbirji, I feel like we are not in the 1930s. We don't have the ability to fight a Indian state, even if that would be appropriate or not. Like, that's a question that we shouldn't even be thinking about right now. We're at the state of the Panth in the 1870s. We need to be having our own Singh Sabha there, you know? We need to be having our own reconnection to Guru Granth Sahib Ji and our own reconnection to Sikh history, and developing literature or art or culture that speaks to us. Because they wrote stuff that spoke to them then, but we haven't produced as much stuff that speaks to us, right? And it's cool to see lots of younger people now in different fields as well. Because it's awesome that the Panth has so many lawyers and doctors and engineers, but we don't need that many, right? The path of, we see problems in the community right now. in the interview with Uncle Ji, we'll touch on Baidan Dheer Singh. He's another really unique character who, when no one else was sort of talking about it, he was just going into gurdwaras and being like, this is wrong, stop doing it. And like, people are like, who are you? Where do you come from? He did that at Gaiskar Sahib. You know the story of Mandeep Singh? And they almost killed him for it. This is before he went to jail, when he was a young man. Because he saw things that were anti-Maryada being done in gurdwaras, and he's like, I'm not going to stand for it. And so we ourselves will see stuff in our own community that's wrong. So this is different than Sabeg Singh and Shabaz Singh. In that instance, it's hard to tell. The Panth's not really wrong in that case, right? And the Panth, we can see clearly, is made up of pretty amazing Gursikhs. But the guys who are telling Professor Gurmat Singh that Muslims can't become Sikhs or women can't become Sikhs, take Amrit, like, we can obviously say those guys aren't following Gurmat. Professor Gurmat Singh is in the right there, but he's facing this huge behemoth, and we can sometimes feel that too, like, how do we tackle the problems of Punjab, or how do we tackle the problems in our community here? How do we reform gurdwaras here? And I think a good step is to understand that when you walk on that path, sometimes you got to be really bold. And you just got to keep walking, knowing Guruji's going to have your back. And we'll talk about this tomorrow. There's a lot of talk these days, or has been for the last few years, and it's really nice to see, about social activism and social justice. And it's really nice. And I used to be involved when I was in university with a lot of social activism as well. But I saw over time that it wasn't sustainable, the people that I was hanging out with, because it came from a place of anger. And they were just angry all the time. And you burn out. And then you look at Sikh activism, really principled Sikh activism from Sikh history, and it never came from a place of anger. It came from a deep well of daya, compassion. And that's why even the models of social activism that are out there, we don't need to follow other models. We can make our own models, you know? When I think the best example of that, and I'll stop with this, going back to the Guru Sahibs, is Guru Gobind Singh Sahib with his arrows. So here he's committing a violent act, right? He's killing people, but even in the act of killing an individual, he loves them so deeply that he wants to care for them. And so he knows, I have to kill this person because their actions are going to hurt other people. I have no choice but to kill in this situation. But if they're injured, I want them to have enough money to take care of themselves, and if they die, I want their family to be supported for a while. So your Guru loves so completely that even in the act of warfare, he's demonstrating love and compassion. So that is not fun. We can stop right at the thing. So even in all aspects, when you're walking that path, the real heart of Bhakti, if you look at it, and the early Bhagats in South Asia, like Bhagat Jayadev and Bhagat Namdev, what made them unique from all of the mass of Hindus around them was that the mass of Hindus, it was all about ritual. It was all about do this and this will happen, do this and this will happen. And they were like, no, it's all just about loving Vaheguru. And that was the core of it, was just like being in love with Vaheguru. So that is really one of the core principles of what a Bhagat is being in love. And you'll see you can't make those types of sacrifices like Gurmat Singh made, like Sabeg Singh made, or like Mata Tola made without being in love with Vaheguru. So I have made plenty of mistakes. Please don't use your Wi-Fi to check all of them right away. Like, give me a little while, to bask, and then check. It's a problem with cell phones. You can't get away with things anymore, Handy.
What was special about the Guru Gobind Singh had arrows?
Oh, his arrows would be covered in gold, the tips. Yeah. Anybody else? Any questions, comments, critiques? Well, I apologize for all of my mistakes. And
One question. Before Guru Nanak Dev Ji came up with the Gurmukhi script, what was Punjabi being written in?
So Punjabi was a spoken language. And that's why even today Punjabi is Hindu Punjabis write it in Devanagari, or what we call Hindi script, and Muslim Punjabis in Pakistan write it in Shahmukhi. So Punjabi is a language written in 3 scripts. But the language that best fits Punjabi, apparently, according to linguists, I've heard this, I'm just repeating it, is Gurmukhi, because it is the one that was made for it. I don't know if that's accurate.
Gurmat also has something.
Hanji ji.
Just wanted to mention, I think Punjabi was written in Pali. That was the name used before. And Guru Sahib reformed Pali and made it into Gurmukhi. Because actually, I just wanted to add one more thing to your presentation, is Guru Granth Sahib is not all Punjabi.
Yeah.
There's hardly about 10 to 15% Punjabi in Guru Granth Sahib. Rest of it is multiple languages of India, the spoken languages of India. And the most suitable script in which they are supposed to be written, Guru has reformed that script and called it Gurmukhi. So, in my opinion, the Sikhs should learn Gurmukhi rather than Punjabi.
That's my excuse. It's like the Latin script is used for, French, Spanish, Italian, right? English.
Right.
So Gurmukhi is used for different
For
languages.
different languages, and that should be learned by all Sikhs, and multiple languages should be learned separately. That's why in the Ratnamas it says, Gurmukhi akhar jo hai bhai, Sikh Sikh te sikhe jai. Aur bhi vidya jain kya hoi, avran te bhi leve se. And Sikhs should also learn other languages from other people. So it's a very, very broad thing that was given to us in Ratnamas. So that's the only thing I wanted to add.
Thanks. Which Ratnama is that from?
I think most probably this is Chopa Singh Ratnama, but I am not 100% sure. It could be Desa Singh or Chopa Singh.
Anything else? Okay, well, thank you for your time and your patience and your concentration. I really appreciate it. Stop laughing at me. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.